Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
In this interview, I sit down with Michael Ranfone, president and founder of Ranfone Training Systems located in Hamden, Connecticut. Michael and I discuss the many facets surrounding athletic development. We will talk about the importance of play in an athlete's development, as well as how strength coaches can employ various strategies to ensure that middle school and high school athletes are checking all the appropriate boxes in a 60-minute training session. So sit down, grab your pen and paper, and be ready to take some notes, and you'll walk away from this interview with some strategies and tactics to employ with your athletes in the gym. I'm very pleased and thrilled to welcome on Michael Ranfone from Ranfone Training Systems. Mike, happy holidays to your family, yourself, and your staff. Thanks so much for coming on to the Leo Training Podcast.
Absolutely, my friend, and cheers to you and your family. And thanks so much for having me. I know it's been a long time coming, so I'm very happy that we finally found a way to connect.
Yeah, you and I have had this one in the works for probably 12 plus months now. Easy,
yeah, and it's pretty much 90% my fault that didn't happen earlier. So
no, it's just funny. It goes to show you how busy life can get at times.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I'm just glad you have the patience to deal with guys like myself. But it seems like you've been quite busy yourself. So, you had no problem filling my time slots.
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, life has been pretty busy, but it's starting to settle down and slow down a little bit. And so it's good to take a moment and kind of reflect this past year and stuff. But enough about me.
Without a doubt, man.
Let's turn the mic over to you. Take a moment, Sure. Introduce yourself. Let everyone know who you are, where you're from, where your training facility is located, and kind of what you focus on from a coaching point of view.
God, I mean, this could take a whole hour itself. So I'll just give you the bullets, man. I'm a strength and conditioning coach by trade. I've been in the business for about 20 years. Actually, my first internship was 20 years ago this upcoming May. But I'm also a licensed massage therapist by the state of Connecticut. So I went back to school for that. Started on the collegiate level at Yale University, and then I moved to the private sector when I went back to school, just because it was a full-time program that didn't allow me to keep my job at Yale. So I had to figure some stuff out, and a big part of that was consulting, working with high schools and local colleges and gyms, and just picking up work wherever I could, and that evolved into almost a full-time consulting business. And at the time I was still trying to be a coach and still be a one-on-one guy. So the last 20 years has been quite an evolution for me personally and professionally. And so now in my current state of employment, I run Ranfone Training Systems. We have 8 full-time employees, an 8,000 square foot facility right outside of New Haven, Connecticut. We do everything from athletic training to return to play to adult fitness to fat loss. I mean, we're kind of a one-stop shop. I think we can do so much and have such a diverse clientele because we have a real handle on the fundamentals of what it is to be human and what it is to be proficient at goal setting and then executing a plan. I don't think anyone will be wowed by what we do. We just do the fundamentals really well. So I think that's in the nutshell from the last 20 years to this current second. That's where we are.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And so 2 quick comments. One is, the fundamentals are key because that's what the elite, that's what the champions do better. They just execute them at a very proficient high level, than the rest of us. So that's awesome to hear. And then 2 is, so the evolution, as you talked about, the path to where we are, it is never linear, is it?
It's not that fun if it is, so I mean, I think the, going in a non-linear fashion, you just get exposed to things And luckily you get exposed to things that you didn't plan for. And I think that's where real growth comes in. So the unpredictable, the chaos, whatever it is, it builds resiliency. It challenges your mindset. It challenges your will. And it just like, it makes you better. As long as you are relentless with your pursuit of what you want. I think it lends itself to a better, stronger system or organism or business or team or whatever else you're trying to build. So if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And without friction, there is no progress. So, I don't think it could have happened any other way.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Fantastic. So I'm pumped to have you on. We're going to spend a ton of time this morning talking about athletic development. You work a lot with youth athletes, elementary, middle, high school, of various sports. So I think we're going to really try to drill down and talk about how you do that from a coaching and program standpoint, as well as sort of what those look like for those different populations, those different age groups, and what are some of the things you focus on. So I guess backing up, if you're building a program, let's start with the younger group, elementary, and then we'll go middle, high school. What are you trying to make sure? What boxes are you trying to check off in 60 minutes from a program design standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, that great question. And I think before I can answer this directly, I have to give you some context of how I just think about stuff and what I believe.
Sure.
Because I think that this is the problem, is that especially as the exercise science, pseudo-scientific approach has really permeated our ability to program, we've lost sight of some things. So I want to think about, first of all, what programming is. Okay. So programming is making sure that we're dosing stress in to elicit a certain stress response so that we gain qualities, fundamental qualities, hopefully first, so that we can then go after skills that will allow our skills to show up on game day. I mean, that's the nuts and bolts of it, right? Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot of work and a lot of research on program design, and I haven't seen or heard anyone who's really good at program design, not include something that has a phase called GPP, right? General physical preparation is a pretty important thing for most people. If you work with the general fitness population or general population, you should probably be in a GPP phase most of the time. Okay. So let's take a couple minutes and just look at what this phase really consists of. That all, even the Russians and Eastern Bloc talked about doing GPP stuff with the most elite of elite genetic guys with the best supplements on the planet. You know what I mean? So they had the best of both worlds, and they still believed in this thing called GPP, right? And most GPP, if we want to agree on a couple different facets to GPP, usually consists of these things: low intensity, high variability, high frequency, very aerobically driven, somewhat fun, or maybe fun, just depending on, maybe that's the seemingly randomness of it. So there's all these elements that really lend itself to building an organism the exact same way, but they're all very general. So obviously GPP, general qualities that we have to secure to move along the chain to get to game day, or to get to in season, or to whatever that terminal state is going to look like, right? So if we all agree that that's an important thing to do, that we believe that there's value in doing these types of things, high variability, low intensity, maybe that, variability means mediums, planes of motion, randomness, whatever it may be, cardiac driven. And then we look at what's going on in the athletic populations that are young. Younger and younger demographics are suffering more injuries, more severe injuries, orthopedic issues at an ungodly rate, right? So there's an epidemic going on. And I'll be honest, I think somewhere around 60% of all new female clients that come in my door come by way of some kind of orthopedic intervention. Like, that's just crazy. I mean, I'm not that old, but I didn't know anyone with an ACL. I didn't know anyone with a UCL, a Tommy John surgery when I was growing up. It wasn't until like the last 6, 7, 10 years maybe that we started to see this huge incidence of injury and serious injuries. It wasn't just like, Tommy fell off the swing set and broke his shin. He's got Tommy John surgery because his pitch count's way too much. Like, those things are incredibly scary to me, right? So let's look at some of the reasons that, or at least some of the things that we believe cause these injuries, right? Early specialization, whatever that might mean. To me, that just means that kids are getting exposed to the same type of stress more frequently, more intensely, so on and so forth, right? Like, I never played a sport year round. I played 4 to 6 sports a year from the time I was probably 7 to the time I left high school. That just doesn't happen anymore. So let's go back to that concept of GPP that all athletes should adhere to. What did I say GPP had? It had low intensity, high variability, cardiac driven, some seemingly random, somewhat fun, maybe should be fun, so on and so forth. Well, isn't that fucking childhood? Isn't that what you were supposed to do for the longest time? Like, we are, like, my feeling is that we have removed the organic, natural state of GPP from kids. We've gotten rid of it. So if we say that we have this high level performer, 25-year-old stud football player, and we get rid of GPP and we just go to the intense stuff, do we think we have a higher chance of him getting hurt? Do we think we did right by him? Probably. Like, that's why we put GPP in, is so that they can recover from an in-season, they can build up or build some resiliency, make sure their autonomic nervous system's functioning properly before we load them and stress them up again, right? But in essence, we're not allowing children to have that same phase. And it's kind of funny because, if you look at the idea of play from either a species standpoint or an evolutionary biology standpoint, play seems to be kind of the important thing. You know why we know this? Because if any species thought play was not useful in some way, it would have been disappeared at some point during the evolutionary biological perspective. We would have gotten rid of it. We don't hold on, we don't keep things that don't fucking benefit the progression of our species. And yet every species has some form of play. Now, sometimes that play disappears. Do you know what species has the longest period of play? Or should have the longest period of play?
Well, should
humans.
Humans should.
Humans by, like, what's the longest period of development in any species? We have one of the longer lifespans. Right. We have one of the longest periods. Like, think about it. You're not an adult until you're 18. The brain isn't fully formed until it's roughly 25. So we are developing. The periods of longest development also mirror the periods of longest play in any species. It's funny. And yet we're just getting rid of it. So we're getting rid of this high variable, low intensity, cardiac driven, seemingly random and high fun aspect of life. So is it it's no wonder to me why we have all these problems at the youth level. And yet burnout is at an all-time high. Like, I never knew someone who got sick of playing basketball. Right. And yet that's a real thing. Like, so there's not only this physiological consequence, but this mental consequence. And I want to ask you this question. When was the last time someone got burnt out doing something they really, really, really enjoyed? Does that even happen? So we were removing all these positive facets and features of, like, what it is to be human by this simple, like, we'll substitute play with exercise or sport training or all these things. And I remember, like, one of my first gigs in a high school or a middle school, like, it was an old building and it had all these old signs up from the 1960s in the gymnasium. And one of them says, play is merely exercise in disguise. And I thought that was such a brilliant thing, because that's exactly, like, you can put 10 kids at whatever age group, 10 kids in a room with a bunch of balls and a bunch of sticks and don't give them any direction whatsoever. And guess what they do? They self-organize and they figure out how to play and coexist. It's amazing. But now everything is taking away, like we've taken away imagination. We've taken away the emotional connectivity to fulfillment, and we've replaced it with highly structured regiments, intensity. I mean, I heard of a horror story, just last month, about a local guy giving a speech to his 8-year-olds. He's a sports performance guy. Gave his speech to about 8-year-olds about commitment. I mean, what? I mean, I remember when I was 8, I could barely spell my name. Yeah. I mean, we're asking them to do things that just aren't they're not naturally ready to do, So I just think we see and I've been in this field for almost 20 years now. I don't think, despite there's more opportunities to play a sport, that is, more opportunities to train with high level professionals us. And yet I don't see that we're getting better medically or even from a performance standpoint. I don't see people getting better. I still see baseball players getting hurt more and not even performing at a higher level than what 5, 10, 15 years ago looked like. Because maybe the best guys are getting hurt early, or maybe the best guys are getting burnt out earlier. So now we're siphoning off the top. The cream can't rise because the cream's not there anymore. We removed them from the last couple of years of their development. So
do you think that is primarily driven in Western culture? Do you think that's as prevalent in Europe as it is here?
I mean, I can't really speak intelligently on that, but I think you look at some of the Eastern Bloc, they would pick out kids and they would funnel them into what they believed was possibly the best career path early on. So they would do some kind of screening and standardized approach and say, and say, hey, this guy's a swimmer, this guy's a gymnast, this guy's an Olympic lifter, so on and so forth. But I also think it's the part of that is, their adaptability to this situation was tied to the survivability, and maybe the benefit, there weren't many opportunities, or the opportunities were way different there than was here. Maybe in Soviet Union, being an Olympian was being a god. Over here, it's because you couldn't play professional basketball or professional football. You defaulted to that. Right. So not to mention maybe earning a scholarship to school or, going to med school was the goal, whereas that was the destination. So I think culturally there's significant differences that lend, but maybe because they had the numbers and the intrinsic motivation, that system worked better over there than what we're realizing here.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
And not to mention, there was still a very huge emphasis on general physical preparation over there. So when they thought that you were going to flourish at 15, 16, they put you in on the right track. Whereas now, the person who selects you for being a first round draft pick in the MLB draft is your dad, and you're 6, and you've only learned to hit a T-ball, but your dad has figured out that you're the guy in 12 years from, you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. So, and then he doesn't do anything to actually do that. He just makes you play more baseball, and you accumulate, stress, and you accumulate wear and tear on your joints that are inappropriate for a kid your age or an organism your age.
Right.
So,
right. That's really interesting. So that was a great kind of foundation in terms of talking about general physical preparation, the importance, the value of it, how that sort of needs to be an integral part of any training program, throughout the calendar year. That phase needs to be present. So kind of coming back to the initial question. So when you're working with elementary, middle, high school athletes, right? Say they're brand new, say they've never worked with you before. Walk us through, from evaluation or screening into kind of their entry point into a one-on-one or a class setting, and like how you're going to work on athletic development?
Yeah. So just to let you know that the business has 3 levels of athletic progression. Or 3 tiers. So we try to bracket it into what we call athletic foundation, which is like your 9, 10, and 11-year-olds. We have athletic development, which is like middle school, 12, 13, 14. And then we have our elite training pack, which is, 15 and up. Now, we have those loose brackets, but people still have to qualify for each one. So let's say you're a 14-year-old who's never had any training experience. You're a little overweight. And I don't want to pick on baseball, but this just shows up a lot to me. We get a lot of baseball kids in here who are out of shape. They're unfit because baseball is not really a physically demanding sport. And if that's all you've been exposed to for 12 months out of the year for the last 5 years, you're probably not, very competent, or your capacity is very low in general athletic qualities, right? So let's say we take that person who should be, in the elite package, but certain things have shown us that he needs, different qualities or a different approach. So we drop him down a level and we keep him in athletic development until we speed up. It's no different than like I transfer schools. I haven't taken the same math classes as you. You test me and you say, oh, he can't be in algebra 2 yet. He's got to go back and learn algebra 1 again.
Sure.
So there's certain things like let's set people up for success. And hey, if I was wrong and I put you in an algebra 1 class and you kill it, like great for you. You just got an A on your report card. You feel confident. And now we're all sure that the foundations or fundamentals really well so you can move forward. But if I didn't do that and I misread and put you and placed you in a place where like set you up for failure, now we got another thing. Now we might have a psychological issue on top of a physiological issue, so on and so forth. So those are the 3 tiers that we try to place people in. Now, a lot of the time, like we're not going to see a huge discrepancy between a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old. Like they belong in that rudimentary kind of class setting. And that's exactly what it is. At the AF level, it's just a class. So that's where everyone does the same thing. They all work together. So the big tenets of that, we want to make sure that they have fun. We want to make sure that they start getting a sense of responsibility, of enjoyment, of fulfillment. So there's this huge, and I hate to be redundant, but I am. We want to make sure people are enjoying what they do here. And that's at every level. And I can make a very strong argument that if you're not dosing in variability, fun to get enjoyment and fulfillment out of your training, you will not only not do your best for your client, you will not keep all your clients. So it's just and I'm a business guy. It'll always come back to how do I do business better? And that doesn't mean that I'm going to write the most scientifically sound and justifiable program if it's not what the client really is looking for. Because we have a big problem in this industry. We kind of write for ourselves. We're usually a little bit more type A, highly motivated, and want to make things we want to challenge ourselves. So our program design might reflect what we should be doing rather than what our 38-year-old soccer mom who's never worked out a day in her life should be doing. Right. So we have to be very objective with this, especially when you deal with kids, especially when you deal with novices at any level. Okay. So long story short, the AF is really you come in when an AF class is going around and you see big smiles, you see people exploring movement, you see kids having fun with one another. We try to make it very interactive with one another because what it is? It's social skills. People are learning that's something that just doesn't happen. Especially in the tech-driven world. You put 2 15-year-olds together in the same room, as long as they have their phone, exactly right. So can we start building this skill set that is a life skill? It's very important to know how to look someone in the eye, shake their hand, introduce yourself. You ever go on a job interview, you'll know why. But if we don't start everyone meets and greets each other, people are starting to come in with their friends. It's really just something that they want to do. Rather than dad and mom think you should go to the gym because it's time to get better at, So but we do. I mean, there are sound things. I'm not saying that this is just a recess driven, like people are paying for recess, but so what we're trying to work on coordination, proprioception, mobility to a certain degree, certain qualities that people should secure early on so that they can express those in a much more fine-tuned or narrower expression or demonstration later on in their life. They don't have to show me that they have perfect running form. You know why? Because it doesn't matter, because they don't have the horsepower to run fast really anyways, because horsepower comes later. Like one of the things that we really want to build is joints that can get into these positions that should be expressed at some point, but also the gas tank. You take a very fit or someone who has a great work capacity at any level, they're much easier to work with. What's the biggest thing? Like childhood obesity, childhood diabetes. Like that usually tells me that they don't really have much of a fuel tank. So again, like I'd much rather have someone with a giant fuel tank, whether that's a 10-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 70-year-old, than someone is running on fumes all the time. Right. And that could lead you to a nutrition question or a supplementation or a recovery, whatever. But if they don't have that gas tank to fill up, let's give them a gas tank, and let's make sure that their wheels spin. Excuse me. So those are the things that we try to do. But like it's always under this umbrella of enjoyment, like fun. Like you should have, if you're working with 8 and 9-year-olds and they're worried about commitment and sweating and toughness and whatever else stupid shit that people talk about, like you should be like, I wish there was a governing body that could prosecute you, because that's wrong for a kid. I just think that's wrong. Like training, like we have this whole idea that like people have to, like 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds even have to be training hard and intense and whatever. But what if their infrastructure psychologically and physiologically isn't ready to handle that kind of emotional demand? Like what if? Like,
it's a great question.
You know what I mean?
That's a great question.
Like, I have a kid and I've been working with kids for forever. Like at some point you're going to have to talk to your kid about sex, right? Like, because there's like, even though you're physiologically ready to have sex, are you emotionally, mentally, spiritually ready to do it is another question. And I don't know if there's an algorithm to tell me. So maybe high level competition, we should think like, okay, so there's an emotional, physiological, mental, and spiritual demand on competition. If that's all your kid is exposed to, are we not creating they have to be apathetic in some way. They don't handle it. And the coach yelling or getting mad, like this must be like someone screaming in Japanese to them. So I think it's just a mix of signals going to these kids. But
no, those are excellent points, and just kind of the perspective you're bringing, thinking about some of these other factors that are super, super important. But sometimes when you look really just at, or have a tendency to look at sets and reps and weight and stuff, you forget all of these things that are have such a huge impact. So how do you what are some of the things that you include in those classes? Like, could you just give examples of maybe exercises or things to help facilitate that fun playful environment and work on social skills, like kind of keeping it in a game like atmosphere?
Yeah, so like one of the things that we do is we make sure that we like have people introduce themselves in front of it. Like, so if a new kid comes up, everyone's got to go around in a circle and just say their name or say something funny about themselves or something that they like, all right, to break the ice. Classic Icebreaker 101. Just tell us about yourself, and maybe it's like who your favorite superhero is or whatever. Then we do some kind of like partner assisted warm up where we'll take maybe those noodles, those foam noodles that you can and we'll do like a tag session or a jousting session. Now tell me what qualities they aren't working. Change of direction, proprioception, kinesthetic awareness, hand-eye coordination, like movements in multi-planes, like, and we'll just do that, but we'll set some rules up so they can only use their right hand or their left hand. So now we're working on dexterity, or maybe they can only hop, so they have to hop on one foot. Single leg training, like maybe one of the reasons why people blow out their ACLs is they don't spend enough time on one foot navigating or negotiating different spatial and physical, motions. So like there's a ton of different things. We do a bunch of crawling and tumbling. Like we change proprioceptive environments. We change proprioceptive inputs all the time. It is rapidly changing, and we never harp on especially now, we never harp on technicality. Like that technically wasn't a good squat. Like they should be exploring things to the nth degree. Like exploration, that feeling of making sure that they have those degrees of freedom to pick out their best strategies to allow them to self-organize is probably the best thing we can do. Again, I take this back to recess, or maybe when you were a kid, you would ride your bike to the park and you guys would just decide what to play based on what you had at your disposal. Right. But you made the rules, you governed it, you figured out what's fair and what's not. You realized what kid was the dickhead, what kid who could play, but this is the social skill stuff. So as funny as it sounds, like we try not to intervene too much unless things are just going out of control or not going, I think it's just like if you go bowling, we put the bumpers down, right? So that the ball gets guided down the alley. Right. So that's what we are as coaches. We just facilitate whatever they're going to do. But then we'll try to work on, something, I guess, that has a little bit more guidelines. Like if we're actually going to train a movement, we train it with no load. We train it in with very basic setup or suggestions of what to do. And then we just let them go. Again, let them figure some stuff out, And I think that's also like the beauty of what we're trying to do. Because if you go to practice, they just you have to operate in the confines of this drill. Right. Well, what if that drill has no real application to the sport when you get out on the ice? Because Frankie's over there and Joey's over there, and it's not what I saw at practice, and what you saw at practice is all that because you've gotten rid of all the other possibilities because you never showed it to them. So it is just about exposing them, and I say seemingly random. We know what we're doing. They have no freaking clue, because we have game plans and we have lesson plans and everything like that. But it should seem kind of, and parents probably oh, these kids, they're just doing random shit. Yeah, maybe to you, but we know exactly. So there's a way of progressing a drill. Like maybe we never go single leg until we get good at, double leg, whatever it is. Or maybe when we bring out an agility ladder, which is nothing more than the modern day version of hopscotch, which no one plays anymore, especially females who hopscotch is a very single leg driven activity.
Right.
And who gets more ACLs than, so I'm not saying there's a strong correlation, but isn't it funny that we just stopped doing some things? So, and again, I could be totally bullshit right now, right? But I'm going to do these things because at least I know they're going to have fun and they're going to practice some things that I think are important.
Very cool. That's cool, man. I love how all of what you just shared there came back to that earlier quote that play is merely exercised
in disguise. Yeah,
that's great. And for that for that age group, and that's I'm working with that age group myself more and more several times a week. That was one of the things I realized off the bat. I've got to be looser. It's got to be fun. You're not working with high school kids that might be trying to go and get a athletic scholarship or seriously training. And you can tell just when they walk into the room, they're the high school athlete at that point in their life is a little bit more self-motivated, self-disciplined, driven versus a kid
totally
who's is just rolling around on the ground and they're just having fun, and which is great because it kind of reminds you sometimes as an adult not to take things too seriously as well.
100%, and that's exactly why even though these elements and I think there are three basic elements that comprise our service, but those elements should be present no matter what age, what skill, whatever you are, or whatever you do. You should have these three things. There should be an element of play, there should be an element of practicing, and there should be training, right? Those are the three elements that comprise our service. So I think play is the most underrated, most underutilized, and most undervalued facet of what we do as professionals. Hands down, overwhelming. If we had even a third representing each one, we're probably at 10% of play. There's not many people I know, especially in our profession, that say, man, I really had fun at that workout. Most people don't talk about their workout as being fulfilling or fun.
They talk about it as being work.
Being work. I got to get it in. I got to do this. And I don't have a problem with that. Listen, I come from I was forged in sports performance before I was a sports performance coach. You know what I mean? Like, I made a living being the guy who tried to outwork everyone and spend all his time in the weight room and blah, 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 cliche. But like, again, that doesn't mean that attitude is best for my clients. So removing yourself from the equation, being objective, being agnostic, having like things that you can go off of that have nothing to do with your emotional connection to the reason why you're here or the reason that you did things or so on and so forth. So making sure that like everyone again, this is like, if you want to look at this just from the business perspective, if I could tell you that you were going to increase your client retention by a lot, if you just made people enjoy themselves while they're in your presence. And I'm not talking about you have to goof off and you have to hedge or sacrifice good quality training. That's not what I'm about. But I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. Yeah. I think you can have very sound training that does everything that you say. If you're doing fat loss, if you're doing muscle gain, if you're doing strength, whatever. But I think we never talk about that within the context of just enjoyment, fun, fulfillment. Never. I've never heard it before. And as you get older, maybe the things that motivated you, maybe the things that drove you just change. Like my training goals are not the same as what I am now as when I am 22, and that's okay. Maybe it doesn't matter how much I bench press anymore, Like at some point you're going to have to deal with that important question of like, how much you bench. I don't give a shit, Right. And that used to be the marker of how good of a strength coach you were. I mean, I remember every time I introduced myself as a strength coach or, whatever, they're like, oh, what's your bench squat deadlift? I'm like that fucking matters and what competent level coach I am. You know what I mean? So, or the whole idea is like, you should have a 6-pack if you're a trainer, or you should be the visual display of what a human being should be like if you're in the health and wellness. Like, what if I just get people to where they want to be? Is that fine too? Like, can I just coach them and guide them the way I think is best? Like, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous, but
that's a great point. Yeah, and coming back to what you said there is, removing yourself from the equation and making sure you're staying objective and addressing, what they need as an athlete and just kind of overall athletic development and keeping it fun and making sure to not let yourself get in their way, like meaning you're not programming for you.
Yeah, I mean, the old joke used to be, oh, you go to a Globo gym and you get a personal trainer, you're just going to get the personal trainer's program. You're going to do bench and biceps, like, and and it was funny, but it still happens. It's just like now, like a couple years ago, everyone should deadlift. Okay, like I don't disagree, but like, is that the panacea of training? Like, just so that
right.
Like everyone, like deadlift bacon and whatever else was the big thing. Yeah, coffee. Like who gives a shit? Like, let's make sure that we're doing right by our clients. That's who we're beholden to. That's who we have to like. That's why we do this stuff. And that's what gives us the opportunity to have careers, have families, and feel fulfilled ourselves. So again, like, you show me a strength coach that doesn't enjoy what he does, he's probably a workaholic who's a stress case. But you show me a strength coach that loves work, like honest to God, loves working with his people. And most of those guys are the worst, business owners, because I consult too with like small business owners now. And most of those guys are the best people in the world. They're actually very good coaches. They're just terrible fucking business owners. And they're the ones who struggle to make ends meet, while the guy down the street who's got 20,000 people on Instagram following him is killing it. And he does dumb shit. Like, there's this weird parity in our field,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we touched on sort of the athletic foundation population or group class that you have at Ranfone Training Systems. So move to the next tier, the second tier, athletic development, right? And that would, I think you said that would probably somewhere be around like 14, 15, 16. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's like the middle school crowd. So like let's say 13 and up, 13 to 15. Let's just say, and again, like I know, dude. I remember I was in 6th grade, and this kid next to me in social studies was shaving. I didn't start shaving until I got to college. So like you have this wide range of like physical growth and development and mental growth and development. So we try to say that age group, but it just depends if where you're going to be the best fit, right? Right. So it is mostly a group environment, meaning like you start when you warm up, but the types of drills, like sure you're still going to have some maybe some coordination drills or change of direction drills or speed drills or whatever. But now we're going to get a little bit more into the technical aspects and maybe how it relates to your sport. So like we can say, hey, if you're a baseball player, this is what it looks like. Remember that every time you steal second base, you're actually doing this, so but just kind of giving them a little bit more of a specific picture to assimilate the information, right? We also try to introduce some form of resistance training at that point where it might be just a kettlebell goblet squat, but now that we have the foundational qualities, work capacity, mobility, coordination, and maybe just, mental awareness or maturity, that we can hand them a weight and know that they're going to, protect themselves and understand and appreciate their surroundings. Right.
And I think one of the biggest things you just touched on there, and this is, I'm much more conscientious of this now as a coach, is just the difference in movement and body awareness in all those different age groups. Like, elementary to middle school to high school, you look at them, some of them have no context of how they're moving their body in space.
100%. So again, if they don't have any understanding of how they're moving in space, I don't know if just giving them weights or giving them higher level movement demands is what they need. So maybe we can regret, maybe they don't get what it's like to be on 2 feet moving laterally. So we have a frontal plane deficiency, but if we put them down on all fours and we have them bear crawl to the side, they actually are really good. And maybe that develops their core, whatever the hell that is. Maybe they're, they're the mental acuity to perform a task. Maybe it's just about them understanding how to take directions. I don't know. But if it gets better by making it, something of the ask easier, then just do that and do more of it. And then you build work capacity anyways. So you get capacity, you get competency, you get compliance, you get like all these things. And that's coaching. Like if someone doesn't look good when they front squat, stop front squatting. Figure out if squatting is important to you, figure out the constraints and then remove those constraints and then still work the pattern. Like that's all coaching is, right? So just figuring out how to put someone in position to be successful.
Awesome. 100%.
And that's just good programming too. But it's hard to program if you don't evaluate. Like I'm very stingy on evaluations and trying to figure out, like you have to identify certain things, right? So but with the kids stuff, like we do want them doing a little bit more directed training. So like I talked about the 3 facets, there's play, there's practice, and there's train. So maybe the training as it pertains to actual qualities, maybe it's a little bit more regulated or specific. So maybe we're trying to get them stronger in something or work on an endurance quality, but everything is done in a group format. Everyone gets their own program that's slightly regressed. So you might see someone doing a hinge exercise, but someone might be doing a kettlebell deadlift. Someone might be doing a rack pull. Someone might be doing a trap bar deadlift. So everyone's doing the same movement pattern, but we've fit their body type and their constraints to the exercise that's going to lend them to be most successful.
Excellent. That's awesome. Fantastic. Yeah. And I think that's so important to do, is going back to your point about setting up each individual for success, right? But you're keeping it. Everybody's working on the same movement pattern, but they're working at their current ability level, right?
100%. And the ability level. That's a great point, because I don't want like someone who's weaker than someone in a particular exercise, but still can be good at the same movement pattern, to feel like they're less. So it'll be like, Timmy, you're just gonna do, because you can't get into the position, you're just gonna put 55 pounds and do deadlifts, but you're going to do more because it's less weight, rather than everyone's going at it with the equal intensity and intent. So someone who's going maximal on a kettlebell deadlift is someone's doing a maximal rack pull, maximal trap pull. It's all relative. And we're not saying this is good. We're just saying this is how you're going to be successful right now for you. And everyone rallies around one another. Like it's not like, oh my God, that guy's doing double kettlebell deadlifts with 48s. He's a weak, like, no, that kid's getting after it. So it's just a matter of making sure that you have explained and make sure that they understand that this is best for them. But they're still training. Like, you're not going easy because you're inefficient, you're weak, you're less than. You're just doing different stuff because it's better for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And communicating that to them so they know that is, I'm sure, pretty essential.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without
Fantastic.
a doubt.
Is there anything you wanted else to include in the athletic development tier before kind of touching on the
elite
third tier? Yeah, the elite.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, another thing is like we start to see, this is the continuation of the social stuff. We see kids who want to stay in the program because their friends are here. So there's a couple of things I look at that, like, I'm doing right by setting up people to be, socially competent, but also that's just good business. Again, like, I'm not in a charity, right? I'm not a soup kitchen. So everything I do, I have to be able to justify through multiple lenses, as a coach, as a therapist, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. Like, what are the things that I can make sure that I agree on and that I'm being true to? So I think there's nothing better than building relationships. That is the foundation of coaching, is the connectivity of the coach, of the communication, of making sure that you're doing right by your clients, making sure that you're adding value of quality of life to them. You know what I mean? At whatever level. So that's why I try to think about this stuff in so many, multi-directional, multifaceted ways. But that's about it with the athletic development. And then the elite is that's basically full customization. That now we're getting ready for like their very specific needs. So if someone's going to play football, they will get what we believe is a football program, or what they need to do to be successful. Now, we could have 5 kids who are all football players, but let's say those 5 kids who've all gone through the system, they're all entering, let's say, sophomore year. So now maybe they're going for a varsity spot, whatever. Those 5 football players might get 5 different programs. You know why? Because one might be the quarterback, one might be an O-lineman, one might be a running back, one might be a wide receiver, and one might be a safety. So sure, there's going to be some overlap, but what do they have to do personally to be good at their sport and then their position? Mm-hmm. So there are different things that we have to make sure that we're fine tuning. So maybe the O-lineman never runs, 200-yard striders in lactic conditions, because you know what? That stuff is bullshit. That doesn't happen. He'll never face that kind of demand metabolically, mechanically, neurologically in a sport. So why do we want to expose him to dumb shit now, especially because he's young? So right. Those kids might get all different programs. But again, like, there's going to be overlap, and we do overlap by either quality or movement pattern or whatever. But right. It's not uncommon to see someone, pushing the sled for conditioning, if maybe they're an O-lineman, and the wide receiver doing something on our treadmills, both for 5-second intervals, but it's highly different work. It's all under maybe alactic conditions, but what their alactic looks like is far different than one another's, No,
that's a great point. And I love how, let's just say the work, rest ratio is the same thing, but it's very specific to that athlete and the position they're playing within the sport, the wide receiver and the O lineman. Because it's different demands at those positions, right? That wide receiver, maybe they catch a ball and they're have to run 60 to 80 yards. They need to have the capacity to do that. Whereas the O lineman,
100%.
they're going maybe 7 to 8 seconds, maybe.
Yeah. And I think about it this way too. So like, if you're working with team sports, you're really working with aerobic alactic athletes. So what should you have worked on before you touch alactic? What should you have worked on?
Aerobic.
And when should we have done that?
As in
for the
kids?
5 years, forever. They should always have been doing that. Like, and it's okay that they, because it'll come out in the wash anyways. But now that we know that their aerobic system can handle alactic work, we dose them with alactic work, and we do it in a manner which reflects how they should kind of express on game day or in practice, right? The other thing is that we're like, and I'm not saying this is bad. We're very into the work to rest ratio, what kind of energy system, blah, blah, blah. But we've been biased on what we're looking at. So you just brought up a great point. A wide receiver might run 60, 70 yards. During that 60, 70 yards, maybe the O lineman is basically hand-to-hand combat with the D lineman, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So we've identified what the work looks like. But everyone stops there. No one looks at rest because their rest period is highly specialized. What do they do when they're resting to work again? So an O lineman, let's say a 5-second play, they don't actually move anywhere. They stay right where they are and they're just hand fighting for 5 seconds. Now that wide receiver just ran a post corner route and covered 65 yards. What is his rest time? What does his rest activity look like? A walk? A jog? A sprint? What is that different than what the O lineman does?
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about specificity, we should also be very keen on what that looks like.
That's a great point. Yeah, because say the wide receiver is going out and they're making the attempt to catch a 60 to 80 yard pass and they don't catch it, but they have to get back to the huddle.
Yeah.
Whereas that lineman is 15 feet from the huddle. They can walk back and then the rest of them standing still.
They can pick up smoking while they wait for the wide receiver. Like I'm here. I'm already at the line. Let's huddle up and go. But what if it's a hurry up offense? Now we're changing the work and rest ratios as well as what the work to rest ratios actually look like. Right. So again, we can fine tune this. The specificity of it, when we ask the question, how are we going to make it look like, we have to be able to answer these questions, but we also have to know what comes before. So these qualities before skills, right? And so these general qualities like aerobic before alactic before lactic maybe, or however you want to look at it. But maybe people should be able to rest in a walking environment before they jog. So that maybe aerobic for walking becomes jogging under aerobic conditions after expressing full speed, So a lot of different things you can play with.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. So one question I have for you in regards to aerobic, alactic, lactic, and then just talking about kind of all the different athletes you're dealing with along these age groups. Do you feel like in your facility you kind of have to make sure that you're, especially for the earlier development years, you really have to emphasize and almost kind of rein them in, make sure they're doing the aerobic work because they're getting so much of the intensity at practice or in their sport? They're not getting the aerobic development they need as a human being.
Yeah, I think again, you can look at this from the lack of free play that is in society. You can look at the lack of physical education, like good physical education in school systems, the cutbacks and recess. So, if anything, we're going to try to make things, again, if you keep things very low intense, but you do it for a good 45 to 60 minutes, that's almost like classic cardiac output, right? That's just work capacity training. So our athletic foundation classes are, guess what, 45 to 60 minutes. of almost continuous activity with very low level or, not technically demanding things, so that we can just show them and they do it. So there's a lot of this copycatting thing where people are just like, we're gonna mock what you do, for the next 45 minutes, and we're gonna move around constantly, which is, again, it's very similar. Like if you looked at it, it's recess. It's like structured recess, mildly structured recess. Right. So yeah, if we could dose one thing into it, into any of our younger kids, it'd be like, let's get them an aerobic system that actually does right by the entire system, because then we can, at that point we can actually talk about why having a very robust aerobic system is really, really important for your ANS. Again, a GPP phase for a high level athlete, you just want them to recover from whatever the stress they had or incurred during the in-season or competitive season, and they're almost going to be sympathetically driven. So putting something back in the parasympathetic reservoir is almost goal one in my estimation for someone coming out of a competitive season. But if you never had a good parasympathetic system to begin with and a resilient system, what do you do? So that's where I would say it's so important to give kids these features or qualities of the system that will inevitably be under duress. Right. So the childhood is nature's GPP phase is like my mantra. Like I live and die by that. There's never a time where you can't build a more robust foundation. And I talk about this in the context of math all the time. Show me a guy who's really good at calculus who sucks at algebra and geometry. I don't know if that can even happen. Show me a guy who can't add and subtract and then give him trigonometry. What happens? Because you need to secure those things. You need to have ownership of those rudimentary qualities before you can get into higher level asks or demands. So if we're looking at movement as this is movement arithmetic, like get really good at these things. And I love watching like high level athletes. Like Tim Duncan was one of my favorite basketball players to watch. And everyone said he's boring. Yeah, but he used the backboard on purpose. Like, how did he think of that? He was just really good at understanding what he needed to do to be successful. He wasn't wowing, he wasn't emotional, but he was highly competitive, highly successful, highly proficient in the fundamentals, and he could do anything he wanted on the basketball court because he just had savvy too. But
and he did it for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and that's something that we never talk about in sports is longevity. Never. And then when we see guys like Frank Gore, who's playing pretty good high level football at 34 as a running back, a starting running back in the NFL, we're like, holy shit, what's he doing? We usually automatically default to, he's got to have better drugs than everyone else. But like, maybe he just did it right. Maybe he just worried about and worked on the things that really depend or dictate his success,
Yeah.
So
that's a great point. Okay, so you covered all three tiers. We went through from basically elementary through high school. That was fantastic. So this is maybe a little bit more of a specific question, right? So
yeah,
let's
your show, man.
Yeah. So let's focus on, say, that some of the any of those age groups, but probably more middle school and high school. So you've only got 60 minutes, and this is kind of more of a coaching specific question, right?
Yeah.
But how do you make sure that you address like warm up, movement skills? So you're working on agility, coordination, strength, power, speed, right? Because it's like, you've got 60 minutes, but you're trying to check off all these boxes and stuff. Or do you not? Do you if they're in twice a week or 3 times a week, or on certain days, are you focusing on certain elements? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. So the tier 1, the AF athletic foundation, is 45 to 60 minutes. All right, because we want to make sure that they're highly engaged. We never want someone coming in and like either it's too long, too much, or just excessive, right? So we try to be on the shorter side So if we can get everything done in 45 minutes, get through our lesson plan in 45 minutes, it's done. Like we don't care, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when we get into the tier 2 and tier 3, we're actually going to 75 minutes so that we have a little bit more buffer time. And the way our schedule works is that like you actually have to sign up for our classes. So we offer these are offerings that are periodically in our weekly schedule. So let's say afternoon at 3:15, you can sign up for AD, the athletic development, right? So you can pick and choose, all right, I got to come in, I got to get 2 lifts in a week. And that's what we usually have during those sessions. It's more of the warm-up, foundational stuff, resistance training, maybe some energy system work at the end. That also depends on the time of year. So like, let's say, and we have tabs on all this. Let's say someone's going right into in-season. Maybe they don't do conditioning that day or the higher intensity stuff because we want them to start coming back and super compensating, right? Now, we also have these movement classes multiple times a week where they don't touch a weight. It's all about either change of direction, linear speed, deceleration. So it's more of the field work that these athletes will be exposed to. All right. So we can supplement if someone comes in and they go through an eval and we're like, all right, well, we have 4 months of an off season. All right, well, how many times can you get here a week? And they say 4. So we'll say, here's what we're going to do. In the beginning, we want you to hit 3 strength and conditioning classes or AD classes, and we want you to do 1 movement class. You pick however you want to do it. You just get there, right? And then 2 months down the line, we say, hey, as we get closer to your basketball season, we're going to cut one of your strength classes. You're going to do that twice a week, and you're going to do 2 movement classes. Just because the definition or the nature of the movement classes will be a little bit more conditioning anyways, and conditioning in the way that they have to express change of direction, multiplanar movement, triphasic nature of movement, so on and so forth, right? So we can start to streamline what their schedule looks like so it fits in what they have to do when they leave here, for in-season competition. We also supplement like a couple times a month, during the off seasons, like we'll do a testing so we can know where we are on this stuff. So they'll come in and we'll say, all right, well, let's do a broad jump, a 5-10-5, like some of these performance measures, just to make sure that we're doing right. Like I don't want this to be ambiguous. I think one of the best things is to measure against what you say you were going to do in this profession. So if it's body fat, what's your body fat look like? If you want to throw 95 miles an hour and you started at 83, let's hopefully, halfway down the line, we're getting there. So if we need to make you just a more like versatile athlete, let's look at your 5-10-5, your 10-yard sprint, your vertical jump, your broad jump, your so on and so forth. And let's see if these things are moving. Because if we hold value in them, then we should retest them. No different if you're going to do an FMS, you only do 1 FMS once. You're not really doing the FMS. But you know what I mean? Like you're not using it for it. You're just making it. It's a marketing piece, which again, I'm not going to say that's good or bad. If it gets people in the door and then you do right by them, I don't care. But like if you only use the FMS once and then never go back to it, what's the point?
Test. Test. Yep.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
If you think it's telling you vital information, then wouldn't it make sense to make sure that it's moving in the right direction?
Yeah.
So we try to make sure that we are educating, we are assisting and facilitating with what they need to do during the course that they're with us. So if it's 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever, and it changes for everyone. Now, we still get some multi-sport athletes in the Northeast. Like we'll have people that play at least 2 sports. The problem is that sometimes they have to play 2 sports at the same time. Oof. You know what I mean? So they're finishing up hockey, but their soccer club is still going on. And then we have to default them to recovery. They still want to come in to train. And it's like, all right, well, let's just put some variability back in the system. Let's make it very low level, cardiac driven, or we'll just go to the lowest common denominator. Like, what do we have to do, or what can't we give up? So, I mean, it's so specific, and like we're pretty upfront with the parents. Like, we don't sugarcoat much. Like we try to be very honest and transparent about what we're doing, and that might mean that your kid shouldn't play a sport 3 seasons in a row. Not everyone wants to hear that because they don't get it. They think their kid's going to fall behind. And I'm not doubting parents' intentions. Like I would never be that presumptuous, but sometimes they just don't know. And they feel as though that if they don't keep up with the Joneses, that they're not doing right by their child. And that's a really hard conversation to have. But again, like if we're in the business of providing these opportunities, then we have to have this type of communication. Like I said earlier, coaching is connectivity. Connectivity is about communication. So if we don't get buy-in from the parents, they're just going to go to the place that's going to do what they want. And that happens, I hate to say it, but that happens a lot. People go and they just, sorry, we're not going to make your kid, do highly fatiguing activities while they're already playing multiple sports. But because the litmus test of how well your coach is how tired and sore you are, is still a thing. Like that's a kid gets picked up by their parent. How was it? And they're dripping in sweat. And they're like, oh, it was the hardest thing ever. The parent's like, oh, it must be good then. So there's this equivocation of like difficulty and effectiveness and it's only because our consumers are uneducated. They don't know the difference. They don't know like what's actually going to help their kid because it's not their thing. They don't know. It's not their fault.
How do you educate the kid and the parent?
Well, we try to have as many real conversations as possible. We do have a pretty extensive evaluation process. We invite the parent to be there for the whole time to see exactly what we do, exactly what information we're pulling out, why we're mining these things out, why do we care. So it's almost like a 75-minute course on our values without saying just that. But I think if we're going to make good decisions, we have to have good information, and like their engagement with us that first day is critical to a successful relationship, and it doesn't always go. Some people just don't want to listen. Some people don't want to learn, or some people just don't want to admit they don't know. And that's, we can only do what we can do. Right. But we try to have these conversations and say, hey, and we put out a lot of material. We host free clinics, free seminars. One of my coaches is actually putting out a book very soon about athletic development.
Cool.
So that'll be exciting. And we just want to make sure that, and we make ourselves very accessible. People want to come down and take a look at what we do. People want to talk to us. Absolutely. We got an open door. Just call us, so that we can accommodate you accordingly, So, if there's another thing that I can do, I'll try it out. Seriously, like I try to make sure that everyone, like the worst thing in the world is having someone not see you because they don't know you exist or don't understand that you're different from the guy next door. And that's unfortunately the marketing situation, which again, most small business owners don't understand that piece. And I myself, I'm not great at it, but I understand its importance and I have someone do it. I just don't do it personally. So.
Final question.
Yes, sir.
So, how did you come up with the tag phrase, build athletes, make monsters? All right.
Yeah.
And,
all right.
And what does that mean?
Well, I'm going to say like I actually stole some of it. Okay. So,
okay.
So, I'll admit when I do stuff, right? So I've been friendly with Charlie Weingroff for years, and one of the things he said one time is like, "Oh shit, man, I'm just trying to make monsters. That kid will be a monster, whatever." And I was working with a football team, a local football team, maybe that summer, and I was given a speech in the weight room. And I repeated something that like what he said, and it just fired everyone up. So I was like, wow, that was like, and it was like, it wasn't a contrived planned speech. It came out, and it matched like the emotionality of the room at that point. And everyone just like kind of rallied around it. So I'm like, oh shit, make monsters, huh? So I started putting the term monster on some of my t-shirts and some of my sweatshirts and stuff like that. I called it the Charlie Weingroff line. So I did give credit to him, and he got all the apparel that had monster on it. But I started to think about make monsters, and like, yeah, it's kind of like a, childish kind of thing that like, it drives a response and emotion. Yeah, it's fun. But like I always said, I want to build athletes. Like that was my thing from the start. I think if you're really good at what you do, you actually engineer outcomes, right? So there's a part of this that you're deliberately doing, you're undertaking, and you're checking the boxes that you have to do to make sure that you can move forward on the continuum. There's also and so build athletes was always there, and make monsters. I gave that a lot of thought, and again, heavily influenced by Charlie and just knowing what kind of guy he is. Like that guy to me is on a different level, in a couple different ways. Like physically, he's a fucking monster, right? But intellectually, mentally, he's on another level. So I thought about this whole thing. You have this very kind of like the engineering side, which is almost like the hard science. Like this is what we know about physiology and neurology. Let's adhere to it. Let's exploit it. Let's utilize it. But on the other side, if you just do that, like if you don't want to be a monster, meaning living and engaging, your pursuits on a deeper level, intellectually, mentally, physically, spiritually, you have to have both. So like the monster side is like who you become to your actions, but the build athletes is like that's the plan. The other side is how do you execute? Like everyone can have the same plan, but you get different results. Like what's your deficiency? What are the constraints of the system that we have to operate within? So I want a very highly intelligent plan that's just laid out, that make no mistake, it's the best that we can offer you, but now you got to bring and fucking lay the wood intellectually, mentally, spiritually, physically, whatever you got to do that you can control to make a monster. So that's where it comes from.
That's awesome. I love it. Mike, thanks so much. This has been a blast. Pleasure having you on. Took some couple pages of notes here, and definitely be re-listening to this one again. So very excited to share this. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the show.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure, man. I'm so glad it finally worked out, and I think I've been yelling for almost an hour now, so I apologize if to your listeners if I yell too much or swear too much, but that's just me, man. But I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
You're welcome. Yeah, that's just the passion and the energy. So it's good stuff. Just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye off air.
You got it.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.